My name is Jan Harzan. I'm the Executive Director for MUFON. We are a scientific research organization that basically collects sighting reports from the public and then goes and investigates them. Our mission statement as an organization is the scientific study of UFOs for the benefit of humanity, and we have three primary goals. We investigate UFO reports, we promote research into the UFO subject, and we educate the public on our findings. MUFON is really more just left of center, where we try to take a scientific approach by collecting the data first off, and then reviewing the data, investigating the data, and making sure that what we're seeing is actually something that's truly an unknown. We have 3,000 members worldwide. Many scientists, physicists, PhDs, metallurgists, biologists, all the way down to just the average citizen who really wants to get involved. Some of those have chosen to become field investigators, and they go through our field investigative training courses. They become part of the team in their state or country where they reside, and they actually get engaged in going out and meeting this phenomena head on. We receive about 500 to 1,000 reports per month from around the world. Field investigators will take the case, generally review it, try to come up with a hypothesis, checking star charts, and we'll go put an investigation in place to determine what exactly happened. We've recently formed a science review board, and that board is made up of scientists from around the United States and around the world to review some of our more significant cases and try to render an opinion on them. What we'd like to do is be more outbound, more outspoken in terms of the really true UFO cases. So MUFON is moving forward with this approach, and we'll be publishing papers in these different areas to allow the general public and even the scientific community to be able to be challenged by what we're finding. That's the strength of MUFON as an organization, is being really the truth seekers of the UFO field.
Our next speaker, Linda Zimmermann, is a research chemist turned award-winning author of 30 books on science, history, the paranormal, and fiction. She's lectured across the country and has appeared on numerous television and radio shows. Linda starred in the documentary In the Night Sky, I Recall a UFO, which was based on her research into sightings in the Hudson Valley of New York. Here to talk about the Hudson Valley UFO sightings, a century of UFO sightings, Linda Zimmermann.
Thank you very much. Welcome, everyone. I thank MUFON for giving me the opportunity to speak about a topic that I not only have a great intellectual curiosity for, but a great personal interest in as well, as I have spent my entire life in the Hudson Valley, growing up surrounded by stories of UFOs and actually having a couple of sightings myself. So, some of you may be familiar with the Hudson Valley, at least the flap of the 1980s, but what I'm going to present today goes far beyond the 1980s to really an entire century of sightings. So without further ado, I will jump in. I had never planned on doing a UFO book. I hadn't planned on a lot of things in my life, actually, but that's life. I started my career as a research chemist, and I enjoyed writing about local history and science. And when I'd give a lecture somewhere in the Hudson Valley, people would come up to me with their UFO stories. And I said, well, that's very interesting, but I don't do UFOs. Well, after about 15 or 20 years of hearing these stories, I said, it's time I do UFOs, because this just went so far beyond what even I had known growing up. So the first book was In the Night Sky, came out a couple of years ago. And as I started my research, I decided to contact a production company that was in the Hudson Valley And I thought maybe we could have a 10-minute companion video that we can just put on YouTube, something to drum up interest and maybe get more people to come forward. Well, you know, great oaks grow from little acorns, and that 10-minute companion video became a 2-DVD full-length set. And we actually were fortunate enough to win the People's Choice Award at the EBE Film Festival at the UFO Congress in 2013. And of course, with that success came more people out of the woodwork wanting to tell their stories, which is why the second book, Hudson Valley UFOs, came out. And people tell me I have to write a third because they want their story told as well. So I am working on a third, who knows how many more, but it just goes to speak to this incredible scope of the generations of sighting by so many tens of thousands of people over the years. I will leave this up to you, but in my personal opinion, I think the Hudson Valley over the last century has been the #1 hotspot in the United States. So it's open to interpretation. I will let you draw your own conclusions, but that is the premise that I have been working on. One thing I made a great mistake when I first started doing this research was I assumed everybody knew where the Hudson Valley was. My first presentation several years ago, people were saying, oh yeah, I know the Hudson Valley, it's Wyoming, isn't it? Isn't that somewhere in Florida? You name it. I said, okay, I'm going to start with a very simple map, New York. Basically from New York City up to Albany, the counties that are on either side of the Hudson River. But I do want to clarify that a lot of these sightings, particularly some of the largest sightings on any given night, would also spill over into northern New Jersey and western Connecticut and sometimes western Massachusetts as well. Obviously, these were not isolated incidents. If a UFO was traveling 1,000 miles that night, it was going to be seen over a wide range. But for the most part, what I'll be speaking about tonight and what I focus on are the ones that are actually in the Hudson Valley. When I was a child, I was, of course, fascinated by UFOs. I think everybody was, science fiction movies, you name it. But UFOs to me were always things that happened in somebody else's backyard. And then I picked up a Frank Edwards book. I think it was Flying Saucers, Serious Business. And there was this photograph taken at Lake Tiorati in 1966. Now, Lake Tiorati was where my family went just about every Saturday or Sunday in the summer. We would picnic, we would fish, we would rent a boat. And all of a sudden, you can imagine a little kid seeing this image of this, it was described as a coppery-shaped disc, maybe 18, 20 feet in diameter. And I was amazed. I was blown away. This was my backyard now, not some distant land. And the story that came out was this man was fishing by the name of Vincent Perna, he and his brother. He had a little Brownie camera, remember the little Brownie film cameras in his tackle box. He took a series of 4 photographs. When he brought it to the local newspaper and police, they suggested, these were such remarkable images, that he go to bring it to the Air Force Base. At the time, we have Stewart International Airport now, which also has an Air National Guard unit, but back then it was an actual Air Force base. Now this man is voluntarily going there with his photos and negatives. They proceed to inject the man with sodium pentothal and try to discredit him in every way possible. And they're not able to do it because he's telling the truth. I saw this object, I'm not telling you what it is, I just took these photos. So since they weren't able to personally discredit him, they concluded that these objects on this series of 4 photos was nothing more than a blob of developing fluid that happened to show up as a coppery-shaped disc on 4 consecutive negatives. So this was a great influence. This was a turning point in my young life. We had UFOs in my virtual backyard. We had government cover-ups. We had conspiracies. We had all the great elements that would hook a young mind into the field of ufology. I tried to start pushing back this phenomena as far as I could, and I actually came across a series of articles from 1909 involving mysterious airships. Now, you're probably all familiar with the mysterious airships in California and Texas in the 1890s, and I hadn't been aware until recently of our own mysterious airships, a decade or so later. But before I describe what was happening, I think it's important to know what was the state of aviation at the time. This plane on the top here, you can see it's one of the Wright brothers. He's talking to somebody in the Army. He just sold this little stick-and-fabric plane to the Air Force for $30,000. That is $30,1909. To give you an idea, the average wage was 22 cents an hour, and the average worker made about $300 a year. So this was quite a remarkable fortune he made. So this was the Army's first airplane, state-of-the-art. It could go about 42 miles an hour, top speed, and could stay aloft maybe about an hour, but I read several accounts where the wise pilot would strap a canoe to the bottom, because if he were to be going over water, chances are he would be needing that canoe to get back home. The dirigible on the bottom here was a pretty pathetic example compared to the Zeppelins in Europe. This was the SC-1 with a top speed of about 20 miles an hour. It could stay aloft maybe 2 hours. The important thing in 1909, no airplanes had lights and no airplanes had yet flown at night. I believe the first night flight was in Buenos Aires in about 1910. So then how do we explain these mysterious airship sightings? It flies only at night and keeps folks up in Orange County. They were seeing a light that was moving from town to town. There was another one from the Newburgh Journal that was saying the airship was seen swooping. It was over the top of a mountain. People on the other, it was on the Hudson River. People across the river for hours were watching these lights just kind of swooping back and forth and slowly rising. There really wasn't anything we had that could stay aloft for that period of time, and as I said, there were no aircraft yet carrying lights. These sightings continued throughout New England, up through the Boston area, down to New York City. By the end of the year, thousands of people throughout the Northeast had seen these mysterious airships, or at least these mysterious lights at night. Now, nobody said they were extraterrestrials. Some people today said it was a product of mass hysteria. Well, what were they hysterical about? They thought the Wright brothers or Thomas Edison had invented some new aircraft, and they were excited for sure because they wanted to see this great advance in technology. Now, when I was doing my research, going through all the microfilm, I came across this article here, and the title caught my eye, "Human Volcano Erupts." I was like, well, I have to see what this is all about. And it turns out, to my knowledge, it is the first UFO-related arrest. And I will just read this to you. Otto Puschmann, Newburgh's champion cusser, had been sent to jail for 30 days for using sulfurous language. During the nocturnal hours of Tuesday, he was discovered on Grand Street looking for that ding-blasted airship that the Newburgh papers tell about and cursing fervently at the blankety-blanked moon. So here's a man standing, probably slightly inebriated, standing on a street corner in the middle of the night, cursing his head off. He wanted to see this mysterious airship, and for that, he was thrown in jail for 30 days. The New York papers started picking up on these. I found one article that said the great airship mystery is solved. It was actually little Johnny Smith flying his kite in Central Park. And I started to get a little steamed. And then I found this, which I believe was in the New York Sun. If you see a mysterious airship, well, it's probably Santa Claus, and you see he's carrying a lantern there, and that's what you saw. Or maybe it's Baby New Year coming to see. So here, 100 years ago, we have thousands of credible eyewitnesses over the course of at least 6 months, up and down the East Coast, and the newspaper is ridiculing everybody and making fun of it. So all the elements that frustrate us today were already in place 100 years ago. All right, the question everyone's always wants to know, the government, what did they know and when did they know it? I decided to pull out a few cases just to illustrate that, at least in the Hudson Valley, the government knew a lot, and they knew it early, and they knew it for many decades. This gentleman here, Hank Vanderbeck, was a corrections officer his entire life, and as he pointed out to me, we are trained to observe everything. If you work in a prison, you watch everything. Well, as a younger boy, he and his brother and some friends were playing. This was 1953 in the town of Saugerties, New York. And you can see he's standing by a baseball field here, and he's holding up a little piece of artwork he had done. It was a beautiful, sunny, warm day. They're all playing, and suddenly one of the boys says, what is that? Look up. And this is the painting he did for me. He said there was a cigar-shaped object, tapered at both ends, at least 300 feet long, with a series of circular, it was the 1950s, so he described them as hula hoops of light that were at least 50 feet in diameter, alternating red and green. Well, this is 1953. They weren't thinking aliens, they're thinking Russian bomb. Kids are running home getting their mothers. Their mothers are coming out screaming, the Russians are attacking. They call the local police. The police see this. What are they going to do? So they call Stewart Air Force Base. About 20 minutes later, this object has not moved, not an inch in all that time. 3 fighter jets come roaring up the Hudson Valley. So you can imagine the paranoia this caused up and down the Hudson Valley. And as they're approaching this object, everybody's expecting at any moment that they're actually going to fire upon it. It moves ever so slightly, and he said in a blink of an eye, it just went absolutely gone. Just a tiny little speck, and then disappeared. The next day, of course, the newspaper had to answer for this because, it's the Cold War, and why are we scrambling fighter jets in the Hudson Valley of New York? No reason to panic, populace. It was only a weather balloon. I was fortunate enough to have a man from the Air Force approach me and tell me that in 1968 he was working at Stewart Air Force Base in the Sage building. And this massive blockhouse of a facility here. And I said, well, what does SAGE stand for? He said, oh, well, that's semi-automated ground environment. I said, I know you think you're helping. I said, I still have no clue. What it was a radar installation in a national network that covered the entire country. In fact, if you feel like it, you can read up on SAGE. There was more manpower and more money expended in this SAGE network than there was in the Manhattan Project. So nothing flew through U.S. airspace without a SAGE facility picking it up and tracking it across the country. He said one night they're all sitting at their stations and suddenly somebody gets very excited. Now, when you have your finger on the nuclear arsenal, when somebody gets excited, it's something to pay attention to. Well, one of the SAGE facilities down south picked up an object traveling at about the height of airlines, where airline traffic is, only this thing was traveling at a stunning, remarkable, inexplicable rate of speed. They knew it wasn't ours, they knew it wasn't the Russians, and they watched this thing, tracked it fully across the country until it disappeared. He said they spoke about this for months, for years, that was the night everybody in that building knew that there was something out there. So once again, obviously the government knew about it. There wasn't anything in the papers. Of course, they weren't about to publicize that. And this Sage building still does exist. It's gutted now. I hope they do preserve it. I think it should be turned into a UFO museum. What do you think? This is a story I have not even written about yet. This is unpublished. It's come to me so recently. I didn't realize that major airports have plane spotters, trained individuals who to try to identify civilian, military, and commercial aircraft, then match the tail numbers to what the transponder is telling them. Sounds simple enough. Why would they want to do that? Because people like drug dealers would steal a plane, change the tail number, and be stupid enough to fly into a major airport like LaGuardia with a plane full of drugs and think nobody would notice. So that was her job, to identify these aircraft by their, if it was at night, by their configuration of lights, and when it was within range, get the tail number. And she said over the years they caught many people. So she identified aircraft for a living. She was near Westchester County Airport in 1983, and she and her mother were coming back from shopping, and she comes over a hill, and she says there's a massive object taking up the entire sky. Lights all around it, clearly nothing she had ever seen in her life, nothing she thought we could possibly even create ourselves. So she knew the man who worked at the radar tower at Westchester. She called him up. She said, I'm in such and such a location. What do you see? And he starts yelling, we see it, we see it. It's massive. We have no idea what it is. Very excited. She says, well, I'll come in tomorrow. I want to keep following this thing. We'll talk about it. Next morning, she pulls into the parking lot, and this radar man is running around the parking lot like a crazy man. And she says, what the heck is he doing? He was waiting for her. Soon as she pulled in, he ran up and said, it was a flock of birds. I'm telling you, it was a flock of birds. Don't say anything. We'll lose our jobs or worse. She's like, what are you talking about? You said you had this radar contact. He says, I know, but just after we hung up, members of the Air National Guard who were stationed at Westchester County Airport at this point kicked in the door of the tower with their guns drawn and told them, you are looking at a flock of birds, and that's it, end of story. I don't know if this has anything to do with it, but the Air National Guard left Westchester County Airport the following year. But what right did they have to burst into a civilian radar tower and threaten people? And apparently they threatened every single employee there at the time. So clearly they had it. They even admitted that the Air National Guard had this object on their radar as well. And once again, nothing came of it. Indian Point, this is our nuclear facility on the Hudson River in Buchanan. A lot has been written about this. There was a big night in July of 1984 where a massive V-shaped object was hovering directly over Reactor 3, which was the only functional reactor at the time. There were reports that the guards were ready to fire upon this. There were conflicting reports whether they did fire upon it or not. It had been written about, people had spoken about it, but I wanted to interview somebody who was actually there. So just this past May, a man came up to me with the agreement of anonymity, and he said he was not there for that July incident, But the following year, he was on duty one night, and his supervisor called. He picked up the phone. He said, "They're back." And he said, "Well, what are you talking about? Who's back?" He said, "The UFO." He goes running outside. He said this thing was so huge, it just covered horizon to horizon. They tried photographing. They couldn't get it all in the same frame. With a video camera, they basically had to pan 180 degrees. Simultaneously, every security system in the plant shut off. And he said they're all standing there nervously. Do we shoot? Do we not shoot? What do we do? They didn't know what to do. And I asked him to describe it. He said, it looked roughly rectangular. I said, any sound whatsoever? I thought this was very curious. He said, it was silent except for an occasionally, he says, you know those big metal canoes when they flex? He said he almost heard this kind of grinding, like this massive craft was flexing a little. I don't know, what was causing that sound, but he said he still got goosebumps every time he thought of that sound. I also interviewed a couple of civilians who lived across the river from Indian Point. And this was an October incident, at least a third incident. And he said he went to take out the garbage, and there was this huge, roughly triangular craft just hovering motionlessly over Indian Point. His wife came out in her underwear to see it. He said, I don't care if you're wearing nothing, you get out here. And they're watching this object just in awe. And he said, he used very colorful language, which I will not use, but he said the thing just took off. A few seconds later, a military helicopter came by as if it was in pursuit. I said, can you give me an idea of the scale of these objects? He said, imagine a typical lampshade in a living room. He said the military helicopter would have been like a fly on that object. So that gives you an idea of the scale. I have interviewed several other people from surrounding towns. As far as I can determine, there have been at least 6, possibly 7 independent nights, different nights, when huge, massive craft have been hovering over Indian Point. Some of the official excuses were formations of ultralights. And I will get into that ridiculousness in a moment, but why ultralights were allowed to violate highly restricted airspace and why they would want to hover over a nuclear power plant. I mean, it's all absurd, but I will discuss, in fact, I will discuss in ultralights now, because people would tell me, oh, I saw the triangle, but they said it was just ultralights. I said, have you ever seen an ultralight? Have you been in an ultralight? Nobody knew. So I realized if I want to discredit something, I need to know what I'm talking about. I need to go up in an ultralight. So fortunately, in the Hudson Valley, not too far away, there was an airport that specializes in the ultralight craft, and you can see what I'm in is an experimental craft, so I felt much more secure. It's not bad enough that these are go-karts with weed whacker engines on them. I had to be in an experimental one. But it was critically important because I wanted to know the sound, I wanted to know the flight characteristics, I want to know if there were 25-knot winds that night, could a formation of ultralights stay in formation? And I learned an enormous amount. And I also had the time of my life. It was the most sublime experience. There's nothing around you. You feel like you're the one doing the flying. But the noise is deafening. You can see I'm on a headset here. And even with that, we had earplugs, headsets. You have to shout at the top of your lungs to be heard. That's how loud an ultralight is. So when 100 people are standing on the side of the road and there's a massive silent triangle hovering over them for 20 minutes and you could hear a pin drop, That is not a formation of ultralights. I can state that categorically now. It would sound like a flock of weed whackers over your head. But to this day, 30 years later, I can't tell you how many people say, why are you wasting your time studying the giant triangles when everybody knows they were just formations of ultralights? So unfortunately, I had to devote an entire chapter in my book to why they were not The only ultralight that is motionless is one that has crashed to the ground because it's trying to be motionless. So I don't want to hear any more about ultralights. All right, the giant triangles themselves. The real big wave began the night of December 31st, 1982. But I have reports from people as early as the late 1970s seeing these as well. But this is the date that most people pin on this. It was featured in Unsolved Mysteries in 1992. Probably a lot of you saw that. This is a representation of one of the craft that many people saw. And this man was featured in that show, Dennis Sant. He is now the town clerk, the county clerk for Putnam County. And he had his sighting on March 17th, 1983. And a remarkable sighting, I will explain it in a moment. And he got some publicity from that, did a lot of talk shows, and drew the attention of this man, Dr. J. Allen Hynek. You can see they're sharing a pipe here in Dennis's home. And I contacted him 30 years later, and I said, I know, you don't do interviews anymore, but I was trying to look at this as, how did these sightings in the 1980s affect people through their lives? We're now 30 years removed. Has it influenced them? And he said, that's an intriguing question. And he said he would be willing to speak with me. So here he is 30 years later. He was also he was kind enough to be filmed. But his story was that he saw something that looked like this. When he first saw it, he said it looked L-shaped. And it was hovering over Route 84, which is a major, major highway in New York. He said about 100 cars were pulled over. People were out of their cars. His house, this was an elevated section of 84. His house was just below that, maybe about 80 feet down. And he's looking at this, and as he's thinking, I wish I could have a better look, he said it tilted like this to a V shape, and the V-shaped moved straight for him. And we are standing in his backyard, and you can see the overgrown part behind us. That was a marsh back in 1983. This craft hovered at treetop level over this marsh. He said it had so many lights. He said it was lit up like a Friday night football game. You could see everything everywhere. And he was standing under this, no sound. And I said, really, how close do you think it was? He says, if I was young again and had a baseball, I easily could have hit it. And it was just a remarkable, credible eyewitness. Now, he worked for the town back then. He called the local sheriff's office, and they said, Dennis, calm down. It was a formation of, I don't even want to say the word, small fabric and tubular framed aircraft. And he's like, BS it was, don't you tell me. And they're like, they hung up on him. And these are people he knew and worked with. The wave continued with another mass sighting exactly a week later on March 24th, 1983. These three women were coming back from Fordham University in New York City, driving up the Taconic, and they were coming back from graduate courses. They were all teachers. And they saw some very bright lights. They saw the usual routine. People are pulled off on the sides of the road, out of their cars. So they got out, and this is a sketch one of the ladies' sons did. Massive triangle, silent, incredibly bright lights, hovered at treetop level over them for a full 20 minutes. Now, when a sighting of 5 or 10 seconds can influence your life, I just can't imagine what 20 full minutes would be. Unfortunately, the lady in the middle there, Jackie, just got so unnerved, and she said, I just have to get out of here. I can't stand it anymore. So they left. But thousands and thousands of people saw this triangle that night. A young man saw it that night, a 17-year-old high school student who was president of his photography class, came out of school, saw this brilliantly lit triangle, which I hope you can see looks like a beam of light is coming down, illuminating perhaps water. Can you tell you can see the ground is illuminated, so whatever this light was propagating down to the surface. He took this photo, he showed it to the police. It was published in the newspaper, and you know what the police told him, what it was, a formation of. So one of the teachers had saved this clipping, and she gave it to me, and I said, well, this just might be the best photograph from the whole 1980s wave. So I looked him up. He's still, 30 years later, living in Mahopac. And I said, you know, this is going to be a little blast from the past. I said, but are you the Jeffrey Samanez who took the photo of the UFO? And there was silence for a moment. He's like, oh my God. He said, yes, I did. And he goes, but why are you interested in that? It was just a formation of did you even look at your own photo? I said, you have a solid lit up triangle with a light beaming down. He goes, oh yeah, look at that. I said, do you have the negative, please? I wanted to get it into the hands of photographic experts. I waited several weeks. I called him back. He goes, you know, I found the original photograph and negative in the attic. I said, hallelujah, I'm out the door. I'm coming to get it now. He said, no, one of my kids took it to show and tell, and I don't know where it is now. So close, yet so far. But at least we still have this newspaper clipping. I think I mentioned that the production company that made the film was called Big Guy Media, and this is why it is called Big Guy Media. That is Felix Olivieri, the director, and he is miking up little Maureen Davis there, who is still a research librarian. She was a kick to interview. She says, Linda, I have to tell you, I'm a research librarian, and I'm not that creative. I don't make up stories. I said, okay, Maureen, I believe you. Just tell your story. But why I wanted to mention her is she had the unique perspective of actually seeing up inside one of these massive triangles. She was at the bus stop waiting for her husband to come home from the city. And she looked up and saw these lights in the sky. And as it moved closer, she described a giant triangle, and I said, was it the size of a football field? Because that's what everybody uses. She says, no. So I'm like, well, what was it? She says, more like a football stadium. I said, okay. And she said, I hear this all the time, a little red light came up from behind. There was suddenly an opening in the craft, and this little red light went up inside, and as it did, she could see up in it. And I loved her description. She says, the balconies on a high-rise apartment? She said that's what it looked like. She could see many layers lit up inside this craft. It was just a remarkable story. And as she is a reference librarian, I have to believe her. Well, we remember poor Otto Pushman, who was arrested for cursing at the moon. Jump ahead to the 1990s when Pine Bush, New York became what they still call the Northeast capital, UFO capital. And every night, hundreds of people from the tri-state area would gather on these deserted old farm roads and had this most incredible show of lights in the woods coming up out of the ground, large triangles, small triangles, you name it, just about any night of the week in the late 80s, early 90s, something could be seen. At the same time, developers were buying up the old farms and putting in these McMansion houses. Who's going to want to buy a big, new, expensive house when you have 300 crazy ufologists standing in your road every night. So they started throwing down tacks on the side of the road. So anybody who pulled up and stopped their car would get 2, 3, 4 flat tires. That wasn't working, so they applied some pressure to the local town council. They actually passed an ordinance. It was illegal to skywatch in the town of Crawford, which is where Pine Bush. If you went out of your house, stood by the side of the road, and looked up at the sky, you could be ticketed. Well, times have changed in Pine Bush. They now embrace their UFO heritage. They realize there are economic advantages, shall we say, and every year now they have a UFO festival, and it's a remarkable event. The diner in town is now the Cup and Saucer Diner, where people come and talk about their UFO stories. The man who owns the diner, Dino, he has this UFO patrol car here. He leads the parade. People dress themselves as aliens, their cars are aliens, they dress their dogs as aliens. So it's a lot of fun. But at the same time, they do have a series of lectures where they do, for the serious UFO enthusiast, they have lectures and presentations, and they're trying to expand it, possibly get a conference going with it. But many people think that whole Pine Bush phenomena ended in the mid-1990s, but that is definitely not the case. The last 2-3 years, massive rectangles are now being seen. This is a sketch made by a member of law enforcement who lives in Pine Bush. I interviewed 3 separate people, somewhat on a diagonal line of the way this object was moving over the course of the night, and got 3 eyewitness accounts of the same object. Most recently, I'd say 3 weeks ago, this object was seen again by multiple eyewitnesses. The same characteristics of the massive silent triangles, but now they are rectangles. So we are hoping to spread the word. Someone asked yesterday at the press conference the value of social media in ufology. It's because the great thing is, as soon as you get a sighting, put it on the Facebook page. Everybody knows to go outside that night and look for it, and then post their sightings if they have it. It's immediate feedback. You don't have to wait for 3 weeks later to hear from a friend of a friend that the same night you can be out there looking for these. When I first started this research, I thought for the most part I was going to interview people who saw lights in the sky, something darting by, and my very first interview really blew my doors off. We invited a man to my house. He didn't want to be his identity known. Actually, he didn't care, but his kids said they'd kill him if he went out in public about this. But he started having experiences, missing time, seeing short figures with large eyes, back in the 1950s when he was a child. When he grew up, he was going to the store one night. There was a small country store that closed at midnight. He left his house about 10 o'clock. He should have been at the store at 10:02. That's how close it was. But at this point in the road where he's pointing, he saw large egg-shaped craft, similar to what he saw as a child. The next thing he knows, the craft is taking off. He's a little disoriented, doesn't think anything of it. His car is now off. He didn't know how that happened. He starts his car, goes to the store, and they said, well, it's a good thing you got here. We're just about to close. And he said, you don't close till midnight. They said, it's midnight now. So 2 hours were missing. He got home. His wife was hysterical, wondering where he had been. The next day, he's not feeling well. He starts getting severe bloody noses. His leg is sore. He finds a large cauterized scoop mark in his thigh. That night, he received 3 triangular indentations in his neck, which the scars are still there today. So deep, I actually touched them. You can put your finger in them. They're so deep. I wanted to speak to his mother, who was 83 at the time, because I wanted to know what kind of a boy was he. Was he very imaginative? Did he make up stories? So we invited her to be filmed. She was a wonderful, wonderful woman. And I'm sad to say she just passed away 2 weeks ago at the age of 85. But she was wonderful. We had kept in touch the last couple of years. But she's saying, oh, yes, I remember him telling me there were strange lights and there were people in his room. And she's saying something, the way she's describing these short figures with the bright white heads and the big dark eyes. And I said, wait a minute, did you see these too? She goes, well, yeah, the first time was 1937. And that was my reaction. I said, okay, we need to start from the beginning here. She started seeing these beings, having missing time experiences, 1937. She marries a man who also lived in the same apartment building, also had similar experiences. They have children who all had similar experiences. The grandchildren and now the great-grandchildren are all experiencing the same thing. So this was my first case, a 4-generation abduction case, which I said, okay, we're getting into more than little lights in the sky now. Thanks to a MUFON journal from the 1980s, I came across an article written by Bud Hopkins about a case that was also local in my area. In fact, just the next town over from where I grew up, 1929, where a girl was outside playing and she saw a metallic craft, saw small misshapen figures, as she called them, and several hours of time was missing. And she had all the classic post-abduction symptoms after that. So we're pushing back the envelope even further. There was a very unique case. I should mention that girl in 1929 had said that time seemed to stand still. And I'd had a different case back in 1984. A teenage girl and her mother saw this massive triangle coming over their house, and she wanted to run out and see it, and so did the mother, and the husband is inside yelling, "Don't go out there, they'll suck you up." But they went outside anyway. The mother got afraid, and she hid behind a shed, and she realized later, like, that would have done any good. But during this sighting, the daughter says to the mother, "Don't be afraid, Mom. They're probably just coming back to check on me." And in the excitement, she didn't know what to think. Later on, she said, wait a minute, what were you talking about? They're coming back to check on you. She said, well, when we lived in the town of Montgomery 12 years ago, she was playing in her sandbox, and she's looking up at her mother in the window, who was washing dishes. She could see her in the kitchen window. And she said, all of a sudden, time froze. The birds stopped singing. Her mother was frozen in place. It seemed like everything stopped. And she felt suddenly as if she was on some sort of examination table. And she heard voices saying, "We can't keep her. We have to send her back. She's damaged." Next thing she knows, she's back in her sandbox playing. Well, she had never told her mother this. And when she finally did tell her mother this, the mother was stunned, because what the little girl didn't realize is when she was a baby, she had a condition that she needed to have a drain put into her brain, which was still there to that day. So in effect, she wasn't a good specimen because she was damaged. We all in the field encounter some very interesting people who have some dubious stories. I was contacted by a gentleman who was on a local school board. He was also a local official. elected official, and he started telling me this story of how a triangle came over his house, and the next night he started seeing squirrel people and owl people. And of course, I'm picturing big, bushy, furry tails and 12-foot, feathered things. And I said, let's stop here. I need some clarification. I said, can you draw me a sketch? I need to know what you're talking about. And this is what he sent me. The one in the bottom right, he said he described as a squirrel person because it had very narrow head and huge eyes. And the thing that started showing up in his bedroom, he called an owl person because it had a very circular, white, round head. And he said these beings would appear several times a week. He started getting incredibly severe nosebleeds. He went to a doctor, and they couldn't find out what was going on. They finally put one of those fiber optic scopes up into his sinuses and found all kinds of cuts and abrasions. And they said, who's been operating on you? And he, what is he going to say? He says, I don't know how this has happened. It got so severe, it went on for so many months. He just left his house. He had to move. And fortunately, the activity did not continue. Now, this man was brave enough to let me use his real name. And I said, I really appreciate that. I said, but honestly, if you ever have any hope of being elected again, I'm just going to make up a name for you. There's no sense. He gave me his story. I know who he is. I can contact him at any point. But, the nature of the world, there's no sense bringing on that kind of ridicule and ruining your career. I don't want to ignore the classic flying saucers, which the Hudson Valley over the years has had many of. This is beautiful Lake Oscawana in Putnam County. And one night, 3 girls were standing near this dock, and they saw several lights coming. We're looking to the north here, coming south across the lake, which turned out to be this massive circular craft which hovered over this cove, as you can see, just a few hundred feet from them. It was a very interesting story. She was about 14 at the time. She's now in her 40s with kids of her own. And she mentioned to me that her mother had had a sighting. So I didn't want to do this together. I separately spoke to her mother and asked them both to make sketches of what they had seen. Now, the mother here, Carol, in the green shirt, she was also 14 years old at the time. Her sighting was at the top of an apartment building in the Bronx, of all places. And she drew this sketch of this circular craft with the rectangular windows you can see along the middle. Her daughter isn't such a good artist, something similar, but when the daughter saw the mother's sketch, she says, no, that's what I saw. I thought this was fascinating, both at the age of 14, one in 1960 and then one in 1980. They both saw, if not the same craft, a very similar one. Another wonderful witness to a flying saucer at Lake Oscawana was this woman, Gloria LaPala. About 30 years ago, she's in her kitchen ironing, and she had a view out over this deck. And fortunately, she was a better artist, and she sketched this for me. She said this is what she saw. It moved so slow, she was actually walking under it, keeping pace with it as it was moving. She called the local police force. And I want to mention this story also because this is probably the most honest answer anyone has ever received trying to report a UFO. She said, "Officer, can you tell me what is going over Lake Oscawana?" And he said, "I'll be damned if I know, lady." They had received tons of calls. They saw it. And I said, That's a perfectly legitimate answer. Don't make something up. Don't insult the witness by coming up with something stupid. Admit you don't have any clue either. All right, there's been some talk of Project Blue Book this weekend, and I was naive enough to thought I should just look at the unexplained cases. But I decided, you know what? I'm going to pull out every single Hudson Valley case, and this was a months-long project, and examine each one. And the first one I came upon was actually from Stewart Air Force Base. And as you can see on the project record card, it was evaluated as a balloon. Surprise, surprise. But then going through the entire file, you see on the second page there, here's a letter written from Stewart Air Force Base to Wright-Patterson Air Force Base talking about possible unconventional aircraft. Now, why would you call a weather balloon, an identified weather balloon, unconventional aircraft? So I started reading the actual statements by the lieutenant and the captain who had the sightings. The one officer said that the object did not appear to be conventional aircraft, and in his judgment displayed convincing traits of planned maneuverability. In other words, someone was steering this, which discounted the theory of it being a weather balloon. We find out it had been seen on other nights by other people. And the kicker, the last line of the last page, they admit no weather balloons were released during the period of observation and no local aircraft were taking off or landing. So I was incensed. I was just I think I got up and stomped around my office, and I was like, how could they just come out with these blatant lies? So I realized I had to go through and read the full files of every single case. And here was another one that just raised my blood pressure. Here was an object which was Wappinger Falls, New York. It was considered to be a meteor. If you read the entire report, it was seen by multiple eyewitnesses over the span of 2 weeks. And one of the witnesses hiked back into the woods where she saw one of these lights land, got within 150 feet, drew this sketch of this circular domed object, said it was about the size of a Volkswagen, gave very detailed reports, and still the conclusion was it was a meteor. And I started joking that the Blue Book staff had one of those magic 8 balls, and they would shake it, and, oh, today it's a meteor, I was hoping for swamp gas. It's just so random and so insulting. So I urge you, don't be fooled by the unexplained or the lack of information. Read every word of every case, because there's a lot hidden in plain sight there. Some more recent sightings in the Hudson Valley. This is my chiropractor, of all people, who calls me one afternoon and says, I have video of a UFO, and I know him very well, and I said, all right, I believe you. But then he went on to describe it, and he's a real aviation buff. He can identify aircraft just by hearing them. He said he was out raking leaves, and he saw a very bright light in the sky. He had time to run in and get his glasses. Then he had time to run in and get his binoculars. And he said it looked like an upright telephone pole covered in chrome. Now, there were about 25-mile-an-hour winds at the surface, so obviously winds were much higher aloft, so this couldn't possibly have been a balloon, because for at least 10 minutes he described it as being pinned to the sky. He ran in and got his camcorder. The only tape he could find was his sister's wedding video. And God love him, he taped over that, and I said, don't worry, your sister can always get married again. But how often do you have an opportunity to film a UFO? So he filmed several minutes of this. I later found other people who had posted similar videos on YouTube, and there was also a man about 30 minutes from us he is a professional aerial photographer for Hollywood. He used his special high-definition cameras to film this object for 2 solid hours. He's also a pilot. He called the FAA. He called air traffic control. Nobody gave a damn. Everybody hung up on him. Nobody cared. We had this massive object pinned in the sky, in New York airspace, controlled airspace, and nobody cared. All right, I want to finish with one of my favorite stories, and hopefully one that we will soon be getting more information on. In Monroe, New York, which is in Orange County, on the other side of the country, there was a couple who lived in a house set pretty far back off the road, and she said she was always nervous about break-ins, so she got a couple of big dogs to guard dogs. She was always a little nervous. And she said one night, it was like there were two Mack truck headlights suddenly shining in her bedroom window. The dogs are going ballistic. Normally, she would be screaming and yelling, calling the police. She said, "Oh, well, I'll just find out what it was in the morning." Next thing she knows, she's out cold. She wakes up in the morning. It's slow. Her recollection slowly comes back. She wakes up her husband, who was a science teacher, and says, there were lights, I think it was aliens, and he's thinking, He said, "I need proof." So he says, "I'll go outside and if I see anything." He comes back in, white as a sheet, call the state police, call the Air Force, call the mayor, call everybody. She says, "What's the matter?" Well, they were doing construction on the house, and they had a truckload of sand delivered. A mountain of sand was in the driveway. It was there when they went to bed. When he went out that morning, all the sand was blown away except for these concentric circles of sand that were fused and pressed into the black top. So thank heaven she had the foresight to take photographs. She took a series of Polaroid pictures. It seems to be about 18 to 20 feet in diameter, the largest circle. I said, "Is this still in your driveway?" She says, "Well, we never dug it up, but we put another layer of black top over it." And I want to get a team there to take core samples. She said we can dig up her driveway. I would love to get a sample of this and see, was this sand heated to the point where it vitrified or physically fused with that black top? So hopefully there will be a very exciting addendum to this case. So even 30 years later, don't give up. Keep at it. Keep literally digging, and hopefully more information will come to light. So just in summary, there have been over 100 years of activity in the Hudson Valley, no question. Many cases are multi-generational. Far more abductees and contactees than I had ever imagined possible. Massive triangles and Vs in the 1980s and 90s is probably the most well-known of the events. There's a lot of involvement with the Hudson River itself, lakes, and a lot of reservoirs, objects coming in and out of them. Involvement with the Indian Point nuclear power plant, as well as power lines. Involvement with Stewart Air Force Base going back at least to the 1950s, and that it is still going on today. So, as I said at the beginning, I invite you to draw your own conclusions, but this, if not the #1 hotspot in the country, I think definitely deserves honorable mention as an incredibly active location.
Is this the area where Whitley Strieber had his experiences in communion?
Yes, in fact, Whitley Strieber's cabin where those experiences took place is probably about a 20-minute drive from Pine Bush.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Hello.
Yes, I was wondering if you could tell us one of your personal stories. I know you have one that involves the reaction of a police officer.
You want the bathrobe story, I know you. I was in college. I was studying for an organic chemistry test, and I was wearing a red fuzzy bathrobe and slippers, relaxing, doing my work. And a friend's mother called and said, "Go outside right now. Something just passed over our town and is headed for your town." So my boyfriend and I ran outside. 3 large, round, soft yellow-white lights flying in a V-shaped, and they split off in different directions. Now, remember that Vincent Perna picture from Lake Tiorati? I remembered that picture. I said, let's go up to the lake. It was about 20 minutes away. I said, I know it's a long shot, but there have been UFOs sighted there before. Who knows? It's a chance. So I didn't change. I just jumped in the car in my red fuzzy bathrobe, and we went speeding up there, and we sat and we waited, and maybe 20 minutes went by, and I was just about to give up. And all of a sudden, here's this yellowish white light coming from the north, one from the south, one from the east, and they're on this collision course. And we were getting very nervous. Oh my God, they're going to crash. Well, they did come together in this blinding, brilliant blue flash, indescribable, and as one solid, pulsating blue light, it lowered slowly onto the top of this mountain. Well, bathrobe and slippers and all, I'm ready to run up this mountain. At this point, the state trooper pulls up, and he wants to know what a girl in a bathrobe is doing in a car with two men late at night in the middle of a state park. So I didn't want to sound inebriated or anything else, and I finally just said, look, officer, would you please turn around and look? And he turns around, and he was annoyed, but he turns around and look, white as a sheet. He turns, he goes, get out of here, go now. So he was terrified. We jumped in the car. We took off. He passed us. He was hauling. He went by. He didn't want any part of whatever that was. Yes.
Thank you for the excellent presentation.
Thank you.
From your account, it seems that there was a spike in sightings in early 1980s, 82, 83. In the early 50s, there was another spike in sightings. Now, both the early 50s and early 1980s, especially culminating in 1983, were times when the danger of nuclear war was at its height. I mean, we have those graphs now describing the level of the nuclear threat.
Right.
So those specific, and also you mentioned that in recent years, you cited 2012, there was another increase. Now, if you look at the studies of the level of danger of nuclear war, we are now at a period when that danger has reached a level comparable, actually exactly the same level as 83 and 53. And do you think that there might be a
Well, that's fascinating because there was so much involvement with the Indian Point demonstrations that they could fly over a nuclear facility and shut down the systems. So that might add to the weight. That's certainly a possibility.
That's just a nuclear reactor.
Right, but obviously, if there's danger of nuclear war, and perhaps they want to show what they can do to nuclear facilities. So that's fascinating. That is certainly a possibility.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right, if anybody else has any questions or comments or wants to share a story, I will be in the vendor room the rest of the afternoon. And again, I really want to thank MUFON. I really appreciate this opportunity to share a topic that is near and dear to me. So thanks again.